Samuel Dupuis was a man set in his ways. Born and raised in a small town where everyone knew each other, he had developed a worldview based on certainties that had never really confronted broader realities. He was a policeman from another time, one where people believed that order was established by force and that the world was divided into simple categories: the good and the bad. In his small town, he was the embodiment of authority. A strong, hard-faced man who wasn't afraid to uphold the law in his own way. His colleagues respected him for his ability to stand up to the most turbulent, for his apparent intransigence, and for his sometimes authoritarian behavior which he justified by the need to maintain order. But Samuel wasn't just an ordinary police officer. He was the kind of man who made decisions on impulse, judging people based on their appearance and what he imagined about their past. He saw himself as a guardian of morality, but what he didn't understand was that he was actually a prisoner of his own prejudices. Samuel never admitted it, but he deeply believed that some people were more prone to making mistakes than others. He had grown up with the idea that men of color, in particular, were more likely to engage in deviant behavior. He never questioned these beliefs, which he considered to be natural evidence, a sort of popular wisdom. After all, he had seen so many cases where black youth had been involved in illegal activities, and to him, it confirmed what he knew deep down: crime had color. His racism was not necessarily explosive or loud, but it was present, insidious, and permeated every aspect of his life. Although he never openly admitted it, Samuel carried this belief into his daily interactions. When he carried out routine checks, his gaze rested longer on certain types of people, and his decisions were often influenced by this ingrained perception. But behind his exterior as a steadfast policeman, Samuel was also a man worn down by years of working in a system that gave him powers he never really questioned. The weight of monotony, the frustration of seeing criminals continually reoffend, and the internal pressures of his job had ended up making him harder, more cynical. However, he had never considered that his own vision of the world could be false, nor that it could one day be called into question. Opposite him, Marcus Williams embodied everything that Samuel unknowingly rejected. Marcus was a young, brilliant, and ambitious man, but also a product of the diversity of his time. Growing up in a tough neighborhood, Marcus had seen and experienced the systematic injustices of society, but instead of being overcome by anger or resignation, he chose to get involved. By joining the FBI, he set a clear goal: to eradicate corruption within the very institutions that were supposed to protect society. He wasn't just an FBI agent. He was a man driven by principles and a vision of a more just world. Marcus was also black, which had never been easy. Even in institutions like the FBI, renowned for their professionalism, he knew his path would be fraught with pitfalls. Although his competence and work ethic were impeccable, he often faced judgmental looks. Deep down, he knew that his status as a black man in a traditionally white environment did not go unnoticed. Not all of his colleagues were open to the idea that a man of color could achieve the standards of excellence they expected to see in their peers. Despite these challenges, Marcus had proven himself. He had solved complex investigations into criminal networks, but above all, he had played an essential role in the fight against police corruption. This was an area that was particularly close to his heart, as he knew that law enforcement in many cities harbored corrupt and racist elements. Every day, Marcus fought not only against crime, but against the power structures that kept these injustices in place. His commitment went beyond professional ethics. It was personal. Marcus knew what it was like to be treated differently because of the color of your skin. He knew that each arrest, each suspicion, each routine check had a different weight when you were black. But he refused to let that define him. He was more than that. And it was this resilience, this ability to navigate often troubled waters, that made him an exceptional agent. This is how one day, while he was on an undercover mission in a small town to investigate a network of drug traffickers, Marcus found himself on a path that would cross that of Samuel Dupuis. The street was quiet, almost deserted. Marcus was dressed in a simple coat and jeans. He blended in perfectly, but his sharp gaze scanned every corner. The mission he was leading required him to remain discreet and observant. He knew his actions could bring down a local criminal network, but also reveal sensitive information about individuals within law enforcement who were involved. As he entered an isolated corner of the city, a patrol car suddenly parked alongside him. It was that of Samuel Dupuis. The latter got out of the vehicle with a confident gait, his stern gaze staring at Marcus. As soon as he laid eyes on him, he had no doubt. Samuel immediately associated this face, this distracted look, this relaxed posture with suspicion. In her eyes, Marcus was a troublemaker in a quiet town. He was certain this young man, walking in a deserted street, could only be a suspect. "You look suspicious," Samuel said without introduction, a coldness evident in his voice. His words resonated like condemnation. Marcus froze, but without giving in to the aggression. His calm and confidence were shields far stronger than any weapon. He replied, without animosity but firmly, "I'm just on my way on a mission, sir."
"You're disturbing me."
Samuel, observing Marcus with an eye as suspicious as ever, could not help but scrutinize every movement of the man in front of him. This calm, this assurance in his gaze and his posture, everything about Marcus seemed to escape him, as if there was something hidden behind this tranquility. Samuel, a man who never trusted those who seemed too controlled, sought to provoke a reaction. He couldn't bear the idea that someone could be so calm in front of him, that he could fail to detect a hidden nervousness, a fault, a sign of guilt. He approached Marcus, with heavy, confident steps, and broke the silence by saying sharply,
"What are you hiding?"
The question was more of an accusation than a demand, a challenge to Marcus's dignity. Samuel hoped to cause a mistake, a false move. But Marcus, accustomed to provocations and underlying threats, did not allow himself to be destabilized. He responded calmly, raising his hands slightly, a sign of peace.
"I'm not hiding anything, I assure you."
Samuel, who had never been a man of patience, felt disturbed by this calm response.
How could a man react like that? Todo calm, todo serene.
Something didn't add up. In his mind, the questions he asked himself were simple but wrong. Why does this man seem so confident? What is he really hiding under this facade? His judgment was racing. He decided that he had to act, that this calm must be hiding something. He didn't believe that Marcus was simply a federal agent on a mission, and the idea of letting a suspect go without a more thorough search made him uneasy. "I'll have to verify your identity," he said in a dry, authoritative tone. His words rang through the air like a sentence. Samuel had made up his mind, and his decision was irrevocable. While Marcus handed over his identity papers without resistance, Samuel, still in his quest to find a loophole, took the liberty of searching the agent's pockets. This seemingly innocuous gesture was a pure and simple abuse of power, but Samuel did not see it as such. He had the impression of being within his rights, of exercising a form of protection, as he convinced himself. It was at that moment that he saw a detail that caught his attention, a well-stocked black leather wallet. Without hesitation, he grabbed it and opened it, rummaging inside. In his eyes, the situation had already become a form of power play, and he was enjoying every second of it. The wallet was filled with large quantities of bills, legitimate credit cards, and other documents. Samuel, however, didn't focus on the fact that this all seemed perfectly normal. He simply saw the amount of money, which he judged to be too high for a man like that, a man who seemed too serene to be honest. His thoughts became confused, and temptation overcame him. Maybe it wasn't just innocent money. Maybe Marcus was involved in some shady dealings. An FBI agent alone could be a valuable source of information for certain criminal networks, right? But Samuel did not stop there. Taking advantage of the moment when Marcus was distracted by the interrogation, he engaged in an act that his conscience was trying to justify. Discreetly, he slipped a handful of bills into his pocket. It wasn't a big theft, he thought, just a small gesture to mark his territory, to remind Marcus who was in charge here. A little memory, something to make him think. It was not the first time that Samuel had let himself be carried away by this type of small actions.
A free coffee here, an extra ticket there.
He reassured himself by telling himself that he deserved this kind of small compensation for the efforts he made every day in his work. But this time, Something inside him felt more excited than usual. The theft seemed justified in his mind, almost necessary. A few hours after the incident, Marcus continued on his way without suspecting anything. The affair was strange, but to him it was a simple altercation that would be part of his routine report. It was just one more check, one more step in his undercover mission. He had no idea that he had just been robbed. But when he returned to his office, reality suddenly became clearer. Marcus sat down at his computer, started writing his report, and put his things away. He took out his wallet to put some papers back in, and that's when he realized something was wrong. The wallet seemed lighter. When he opened it, he noticed that notes were missing, a large sum. The strange feeling of discomfort transformed into a burst of lucidity. He immediately understood that he had been the victim of theft. But by whom? By a colleague? The theft was discreet, well executed, and Marcus hadn't seen any obvious clues during the interrogation. It was then that he remembered a detail: the police patrol he had encountered that day. Samuel Dupuis, a city police officer, had arrested him without valid reason. The same policeman who seemed to have had a little too much fun going through his belongings.
A wave of cold anger washed over Marcus.
He wasn't going to let this go. His years of work, his years of investigation against corruption, could not end like this. He knew he had to act, but discreetly, cautiously. He began to carefully examine the details of the encounter, looking for evidence. With the help of his network, he traced Samuel's movements, seeking to understand if the latter had ever been involved in questionable actions. Very quickly, the elements began to twist around Samuel. His colleagues were beginning to suspect certain things, but no one dared to say anything. Marcus, determined, began an internal investigation. Through discreet connections and secret checks, he discovered that Samuel Dupuis was not just an absent-minded police officer. He had a long history of questionable behavior, suspicions of theft, abuse of power, and repeated petty corruption that had always been kept quiet in the small town. Samuel was not only corrupt, he had become a symbol of the mismanagement of power, a man who abused his authority to serve himself personally, both for reasons of power and out of simple opportunism. But this would not remain without consequences. Marcus, with the same determination he put into his complex investigations, was going to reveal the truth about Samuel Dupuis. And this time, he wasn't going to allow injustice to flourish. The evidence was piling up. Marcus had managed to discreetly record a conversation between Dupuis and another police officer, where Samuel shamelessly boasted about taking little things from time to time. The uninhibited confidence with which he spoke of his misdeeds betrayed years of impunity. He no longer even needed to hide his actions. For him, it had become routine, a norm within the system that had protected him for so long. Determined to leave nothing to chance, Marcus spent days compiling additional material. He collected anonymous testimonies from young recruits who had worked under Samuel's orders and who had been forced, by fear or pressure, to turn a blind eye to his questionable practices. He had Dupuis' personal finances analyzed and discovered glaring inconsistencies: unexplained cash deposits, luxury purchases incompatible with his civil servant salary. When he considered his case strong enough, he requested a meeting with his superiors. In an austere conference room, he methodically presented his investigation, laying out the overwhelming evidence before them. The audio recordings, the suspicious transactions, the testimonies of police officers intimidated by Dupuis. The atmosphere in the room became heavy. Some of Marcus' superiors may have known for a long time that this type of behavior existed, but few dared to confront it head-on. However, faced with the magnitude of the file, they could no longer look away. Shortly after, Samuel Dupuis was suspended as a precautionary measure, while the internal investigation took its course. But the affair quickly took on an unexpected dimension. What was initially just an investigation into an isolated theft turned into a real operation to dismantle a network of corrupt police officers. By digging through Dupuis' archives and reports, Marcus and his team uncovered a well-oiled system. For years, certain officers had discreetly embezzled sums from funds seized in criminal cases, disguising their actions behind complex bureaucratic procedures. When Samuel was officially arrested for theft, abuse of power and corruption, the news caused a stir. His trial became a symbol of the dysfunction of the institution. He tried to defend himself, to invoke procedural errors, to accuse Marcus of attacking him. But the evidence was overwhelming. Marcus was called to the stand to testify. He addressed the court in a calm voice, without animosity. He knew it wasn't just a man he was up against, but a system deeply rooted in toxic practices. He said calmly, "Justice cannot be a question of personal power. Those who abuse their position to oppress rather than protect must be held accountable. It's not just about corruption, it's about integrity and fairness." Samuel Dupuis, once sure of his untouchability, had to face reality. He was no longer a respected police officer, but a criminal judged for his own actions. His uniform could no longer serve as a shield. His arrogance, which had served him so well, was turning against him. In the months that followed, Marcus continued his work with even greater determination. He saw himself not just as an FBI agent, but as a man seeking justice. Each file he opened, each case he handled, was a way of restoring a little balance in a system corrupted by decades of impunity. As for Samuel, he lost everything: his job, his reputation, his honor. He had believed he could play by the rules without ever suffering the consequences. But the wheel had turned. He had become the victim of his own corruption, trapped in a trap of his own making. The story of Samuel and Marcus became a textbook case. It illustrated how the abuse of power and corruption always ends up catching up with those who believe they are in control. But above all, it showed that it took courage to confront these injustices and fight them, whatever the cost.